Philip here for a piece of the past, and today I'm in Newmarket, home of the Jockey Club, the National Stud, and more thoroughbreds per square mile than anywhere that isn't a nightclub in Slough. But here's what most people don't know. It owes everything, its reputation, its survival, perhaps even its very existence, to just one man. And that man wasn't a trainer, he wasn't a breeder, he was the last person you'd expect to find in a saddle. But actually, he was sort of all of those things. Today we're going to talk about the first King of England to be a championship jockey. Charles II loved horses the way most men love oxygen, completely, necessarily, and without any apology. He first came to Newmarket in 1666, the year London burned as it happened, and that will become relevant later in the story. But he kept coming back. Every year, in fact twice a year, he'd pack up court and drag half of London's coxcomb fops here to Suffolk for weeks at a time. While these days a trip to the ponies is regarded as a steadfastly upper-class thing, we actually have the profligate Charles II largely to thank for that. And in his day, his courtiers absolutely hated it. Newmarket was flat, dusty, and short on the kind of sophisticated entertainment they preferred. Charles didn't care. He was, by every account, at his happiest in the town. That is, of course, when he wasn't in a brothel. And in 1671 he did something no reigning monarch had ever done before, and I might add has ever done since. He actually rode a winner. Not as a patron, not as a spectator, he climbed on the nag himself and ran it in a competitive race, the Newmarket Town Plate, and he won! That makes him the only reigning British monarch to ride a winner in a proper race. Unfortunately, we don't know the name of that horse. Now, if you were a mean-spirited person, you could be a little bit cynical about all of this and suggest that the other jockeys weren't entirely incentivized to ride their hardest against the reigning monarch. You could suggest that. I'm not going to suggest that. What I will say is that Charles was, by all accounts, a genuinely gifted horseman. After all, in 1675 he went and did it a second time. On this occasion we do know the horse's name, Blue Capp. From the moment he won his first race, though, Newmarket became royal. It was the town the king loved, the place where the king had ridden. That reputation was worth more than any prize money. However, it was at this point things got considerably more interesting. You see, Newmarket would go on to do something far more significant for Charles than hand him a trophy. 12 years later, in 1683, it would also save his life. By accident. Charles and James were in town for the spring meeting. The usual crowds, the usual chaos. And then on March the 22nd, an enormous fire broke out. It was catastrophic. Fanned by high winds, the blaze destroyed approximately half the town, more than 60 houses. The royal accommodation was destroyed or rendered utterly uninhabitable. There was nothing else for it. Charles and James packed up and headed for London 2 weeks earlier than planned. They had no idea as they rode south what was waiting for them on their original route. At Rye House in Hertfordshire, a group of conspirators, Whig radicals who'd had enough of the Stuart monarchy, had been lying in wait. The plan was straightforward: ambush the royal party on the road, kill the king, kill his brother, end the Stuart line. Nice plan. Good plan. They'd timed everything perfectly. Slightly unfortunately, they'd timed everything perfectly for the original departure date. But now the fire had moved Charles to being 2 weeks early. The conspirators waited at Rye House for a royal party that never came. The plot collapsed. Several of the conspirators were eventually caught, tried, and executed. Charles II died in bed, which is something of an achievement given everything. Perhaps even more surprising that it was his own bed. And the cause of his survival? A fire in the town he loved so much he'd practically moved here. And what of our conspirators, eh? Well, after the failed attempt at Rye House, where they missed the king because he'd already gone by, the plot remained a secret for several months until an informer dobbed them all in June 1683. That man was Josiah Keeling, a Baptist oil merchant who lost his nerve and confessed all to the Secretary of State. Other conspirators, such as Lord Howard of Escroick, quickly turned informer in order to save themselves, providing the evidence needed to arrest the Whig grandees. The exposure caused a massive government crackdown that effectively destroyed the Whig Party leadership. Lord William Russell was convicted of treason and beheaded on the basis of some pretty flimsy evidence. He later went on to become a Whig martyr. Algernon Sidney was convicted based on his unpublished writings calling for the people to have a right to a revolution. He was also beheaded. Next, Arthur Capel, the Earl of Essex, mysteriously committed suicide by slitting his own throat while in the Tower of London awaiting his trial. Nothing suspicious there then. Now, if you think that sounds unlikely, you're not alone. Charles II himself didn't believe it. Next, the owner of Rye House, Richard Rumbold, was hanged, drawn and quartered. He had fled to Holland but was later caught and executed in 1685. And finally, the Duke of Monmouth had also fled to Holland, but he later returned in order to lead the Monmouth Rebellion in 1685 against James II. It failed and he was beheaded, but that's a story for another time. This had some pretty hefty consequences. With the Whig leaders dead or in exile, Charles II was able to rule without Parliament for the rest of his life. Absolute royal power therefore went unchecked. The Rye House Plot and Newmarket, a regicidal piece of the past.